The air crackled with a heat that wasn't just the summer sun pressing down on the private airstrip. His breath was heavy, caught in a rhythm that matched the pulse of the moment. As he stood inches from the sleek curve of his private jet, the man, sharply dressed in a tailored charcoal suit that clung to his frame like a lover's promise, let his fingers graze the jet's polished surface. It was warm, alive almost, humming with the anticipation of flight, but then a shadow fell across him. Not the kind cast by clouds, but by bodies, moving too close, too bold. The ground crew, their faces tight with suspicion, stepped forward, their voices low but cutting, telling him to back away. He wasn't the owner, they said. He couldn't be. Their eyes raked over his skin, dark and gleaming under the noon light, and decided he didn't belong. He didn't flinch, not when their words stung like salt on an open wound. Not when their hands hovered near their radios, ready to call for backup. His lips curved into something dangerous, not quite a smile, as he leaned closer to the jet, letting the tension coil tighter. The air was thick now, heavy with unspoken challenges, with the weight of their mistake pressing against his calm. He could feel their doubt, their dismissal, like a lover's betrayal, sharp, intimate, and reckless. And then, with a single glance, he made his move. His hand slipped into his pocket, slow and deliberate, pulling out his phone. One call, that's all it would take. The world would bend, and they would learn what it cost to cross him. The chaos erupted before anyone could blink. A sudden detonation of sound and motion that shattered the drowsy hum of Teterboro Airport. Alarms screamed across the airstrip, their shrill wails slicing through the haze of heat that shimmered off the asphalt. Security guards spilled from their posts, like ants from a kicked nest, their boots pounding in frantic rhythm, faces pale with a confusion that bordered on fear. Flights were halted mid-breath, their engines whining in protest, as ground crews scrambled to obey orders they didn't understand, their hands fumbling with headsets and clipboards. The air itself seemed to pulse with uncertainty, a heartbeat gone wild. At the center of it all stood Marcus Kane, unmoved, his arms crossed tightly across his chest. His silhouette was framed against the sleek, obsidian curve of his private jet, a Gulfstream G650, that gleamed like a predator under the midday sun. He was a statue amidst the storm, his presence commanding even in stillness, like a king surveying a battlefield moments before the clash. His eyes, dark and unyielding, tracked the pandemonium with a precision that missed nothing. The guards' hesitant steps, the ground crew's frozen stares, the airport manager's desperate sprint toward him. Each moment unfolded like a chessboard, every piece moving exactly as he'd anticipated, a testament to the power he wielded. A power they had underestimated. The manager, a wiry man named Hargrove, with sweat beading on his brow like dew on a leaf, reached Marcus breathless, his apologies tumbling out in a rush. "Mr. Kane, I'm so sorry, we had no idea." His voice cracked, the words piling atop one another as if speed could erase the mistake. Behind him, the ground crew stood silent, their earlier confidence shattered into fragments. There was Jackson, the leader, his jaw tight as concrete, his eyes darting between Marcus and the chaos he'd unwittingly unleashed. Beside him, Tim, younger and less certain, clutched his radio as if it could anchor him, its static a faint echo of his own unease. They were statues now, pinned by the weight of their error, their assumptions exposed like raw wounds. Marcus said nothing. His silence was a blade, sharper than any rebuke. He simply nodded, his gaze cutting through them with the precision of a surgeon, and turned toward the jet. The boarding stairs awaited, each step a deliberate act of departure, a rejection of their world and its judgments. The engines roared to life, a deep, primal growl that drowned out the alarms, and as the plane lifted into the sky, it left behind a stunned silence, a void where their voices should have been. But more than silence, it left a lesson carved into the air, etched in the asphalt still warm from the jet's heat. Never judge a man by the color of his skin. But this wasn't the beginning. The chaos at Teterboro was merely a spark, a flare from a fire that had been burning in Marcus Kane for years. To understand the steel in his eyes, the weight of his calm amidst the storm, one had to go back to the moments that forged a man who could unravel an airport with a single call, who carried power like a second skin. Days earlier, Marcus stood in the penthouse suite of a Manhattan skyscraper. The city sprawling beneath him like a lover waiting to be claimed, its lights pulsing with promises and betrayals. The suite was a cathedral of glass and steel, its floor-to-ceiling windows framing a view that stretched from the Hudson to the distant haze of Brooklyn. Marcus's reflection stared back at him, a study in contrasts. The sharp lines of his tailored navy suit against the smooth planes of his deep, brown skin. The quiet intensity in his eyes belying the storm within. At 42, he was a man who moved through worlds. Corporate boardrooms where billions were wagered on a handshake. Government corridors where secrets were currency, and the shadowed spaces where deals were whispered over burner phones. He was the CEO of Kane Tech, a tech empire that rivaled the giants of Silicon Valley, its innovations in AI and cybersecurity reshaping industries. But Marcus was more than a CEO. He was a contractor for government projects. So classified their code names were numbers, their details locked behind clearances few could pronounce without trembling. That morning, he'd been on a call with a contact at the Federal Aviation Administration, a woman named Elena Vargas, whose voice carried the weight of someone who'd seen too much. They spoke over a secure line, the kind that hummed with faint distortion, a reminder of the stakes. "Some Marcus," she said, her tone clipped, professional but laced with urgency. "There's chatter, nothing concrete, but it's loud enough to notice. Someone's talking about Orion." Orion was Marcus's latest project, a satellite system that could tilt the balance of global surveillance, a network of eyes in the sky that could track a single face in a crowd of millions, map a city's secrets in real time, or intercept signals no one else could hear. It was a game changer, the kind of technology that made allies nervous and enemies desperate. "Talking how?" Marcus asked, his voice low, steady, but his fingers tightening around the phone. He stood by the window, the city's pulse syncing with his own. "Leaks," Elena said. "Not from your end. At least, not that I can tell. But someone's fishing, asking questions they shouldn't know to ask. You need to watch your back in Geneva." Betrayal was a scent Marcus knew well, one he'd caught in boardrooms where smiles hid knives, in bedrooms where whispers turned to traps. He trusted few, loved fewer, and yet the sting of it still burned, a phantom pain from battles long won. Elena's words lingered as he ended the call, his gaze drifting to the skyline. Geneva was 2 days away, a summit with international partners to secure Orion's next phase, funding infrastructure, and a delicate dance of diplomacy. The stakes were high, the kind that made men desperate, and Marcus felt the familiar thrill of danger curling in his gut, sharp and alive. He turned from the window, his movements precise, and crossed the suite to a sleek desk of black oak. A leather portfolio lay open, its pages dense with schematics and encrypted notes. Orion wasn't just a project, it was his legacy, a monument to everything he'd built from nothing. Marcus had grown up in the Bronx, the son of a nurse and a mechanic, his childhood a tapestry of sacrifice and hunger, not just for food, but for something bigger, something he'd clawed his way out, first through scholarships to MIT, then through the cutthroat world of tech, where every step forward was a fight against those who saw him as less. Every contract, every patent, every billion added to Kane Tech's valuation was a defiance of that world, a world that still, even now, tried to reduce him to a glance. The memory of those early days fueled him, a fire that never dimmed. He'd faced skeptics in lecture halls, rivals in boardrooms, and spies in the shadows, each one underestimating him until it was too late. Passion drove him. Not the reckless kind that consumed, but the kind that sharpened his edges, made every decision a blade. As he prepared for Geneva, he felt that passion stir, a rhythm that matched the city's pulse. He was ready for the game, ready to outmaneuver whatever betrayal waited across the Atlantic. At Teterboro, hours later, the sun was a tyrant, its heat pressing down on the airstrip like a physical weight. Marcus arrived alone, his driver a discreet man named Leo, who knew better than to ask questions, peeling away in a black Escalade. The jet gleamed ahead, its curves catching the light like a sculpture, a symbol of everything Marcus had earned. He wore a charcoal suit, no tie, the top button of his shirt undone, a concession to the heat, but also a signal of ease. He didn't need to posture. His presence was enough. The ground crew's approach was immediate, their skepticism a wall he'd faced 1,000 times. There was Jackson, the leader, a man in his late 30s with a jaw set like concrete and eyes that didn't bother hiding their judgment. His uniform was crisp, his badge glinting, but his posture screamed authority unearned, the kind that came from routine rather than respect. Beside him was Tim, younger, maybe 25, with a nervous energy that flickered in his movements. His radio crackled with static, a lifeline to the tower. But his eyes followed Jackson's lead, unsure but compliant. "Sir, step back," Jackson said, his tone clipped, assuming Marcus was a stray, a nobody who'd wandered too close to wealth that wasn't his. The words were a match struck in dry grass, igniting something deep in Marcus's chest. He'd heard that tone before in bank lobbies, at gala entrances, in the quiet pauses before a deal was signed. It was the sound of a world that saw him as an outsider, no matter how many billions he commanded. "I'm the passenger," Marcus said, his voice smooth as bourbon, each word measured. "Marcus Kane, this is my jet." Jackson's laugh was a blade, sharp and sudden, cutting through the air. "Your jet?" he said, the words dripping with disbelief. He glanced at Tim, who forced a chuckle, his unease betraying him. "Look, buddy. I don't know who you think you are, but you're not on the manifest. Step back, or we'll have to escort you out." Marcus felt the heat rise, not just from the sun but from the betrayal of it all. Not just their words, but the system that made them so quick to judge. He'd built Kane Tech from a single patent to a global force, outsmarted rivals who'd tried to bury him, outmaneuvered spies who'd tried to steal his secrets. He'd dined with senators, briefed generals, and yet here at the edge of his own jet, he was reduced to a stereotype. A black man in the wrong place, a threat before he was a person. The passion that had carried him through boardrooms and battlegrounds flared now, not in anger but in clarity, a fire that honed his focus to a razor's edge. He stepped back, not in defeat, but to let them dig their own grave. His phone was in his hand before they could blink, its weight familiar, a tool as lethal as any weapon. He dialed a number he rarely used, one that could stop the world. Elena Vargas picked up on the first ring. "Marcus," she said, her voice a mix of concern and curiosity. The faint hum of the secure line beneath her words. "What's wrong?" "I'm at Teterboro," he said, his tone even, betraying none of the fire within. "Ground crews blocking me. They don't believe I own the jet. I need this handled." There was a pause, brief but heavy. Then the sound of keys clicking, orders being relayed. "Stay put," Elena said. "This ends now." The alarms came seconds later, a wail that split the air like a thunderclap. Guards froze mid-step, their radios erupting in a cacophony of urgent voices. Ground crews abandoned their posts, clipboards forgotten as they sprinted toward the terminal. Flights were grounded, their pilots staring through cockpit windows, confusion etched into their facers. The airstrip became a stage, and Marcus was its director, his presence the axis around which the chaos spun. Jackson's face drained of color, his jaw slackening as he realized the scope of his mistake. Tim's radio fell silent, his hands trembling as he fumbled to respond to the tower's demands. Kurgrove, the manager, arrived moments later, his suit jacket flapping as he ran, his face a mask of panic. "Mr. Kane, I'm so sorry," he stammered, his words tripping over themselves. "We had no idea. There's been a misunderstanding." Marcus didn't respond. He didn't need to. His silence was louder than the alarms, heavier than Hargrove's apologies. He saw it all, their fear, their regret. The dawning realization that they'd crossed a man whose name carried weight they couldn't fathom. Homeland Security had been looped in, a protocol Marcus invoked only when necessary, but one he knew like the rhythm of his own pulse. Elena had moved fast, her influence rippling through the FAA, the TSA, the chain of command that governed places like Teterboro. The alarms weren't just for show, they were a signal, a reminder that Marcus Kane was not a man to be trifled with. He turned toward the jet, his steps deliberate, each one a rejection of their world. The boarding stairs gleamed, the cabin door open like an invitation. He paused at the threshold, glancing back at Jackson, at Tim, at Hargrove, their faces a gallery of regret. The passion that burned in him wasn't for their punishment. It was for the moment itself, the clarity of proving them wrong, of standing taller than their assumptions. He boarded without a word, the door closing with a hiss, and as the jet's engines roared, he felt the weight of their stares fall away. The Gulf Stream climbed swiftly, the airstrip shrinking below, a patchwork of asphalt and error. Marcus leaned back in the leather seat, the cabin's quiet luxury, a stark contrast to the chaos he'd left behind. A glass of scotch sat untouched on the armrest, its amber glow catching the light. He didn't drink. Not now. His mind was already in Geneva, mapping the boardroom, the players, the betrayals waiting to be uncovered. Teterboro was a footnote, a reminder of the world he navigated, but Geneva was the battlefield. Geneva greeted him with rain, a soft drizzle that blurred the city's edges as his car, a black Mercedes arranged by his European team, glided through its streets. The summit was held at a discreet hotel overlooking Lake Geneva, its facade all glass and stone, a fortress of wealth and secrecy. Marcus stepped into the lobby, his presence turning heads, not just for his tailored suit or the quiet confidence in his stride, but for the aura he carried, a gravity that made even strangers pause. The boardroom was a cathedral of power, its long table flanked by men and women whose names shaped geopolitics. There was Claire Dubois, a French tech mogul with a smile sharp enough to cut glass, Hans Müller, a German industrialist whose handshake felt like a contract, and Viktor Petrov, a Russian financier whose eyes lingered too long, his questions probing too deep. They knew Marcus's reputation, Kane-Tech's rise, Orion's potential, but not his fire. Not until he spoke. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice a low current that pulled them in. "Orion isn't just a system, it's a necessity. A world where threats move faster than Tengueks, demands eyes that never blink. This is what we're building together." The room leaned forward, caught in his orbit. He laid out Orion's specs, its AI-driven analytics, its unhackable encryption, its ability to integrate with NATO and UN systems without compromising sovereignty. But as he spoke, he watched Victor, noting the flicker in his eyes, the way his fingers tapped the table when encryption was mentioned. The trail had a rhythm, and Marcus knew its beat. Claire asked about timelines, Hans about costs, but Victor's question was a dart, aimed to wound. "And what of security, Mr. Kane? Rumors suggest your teams had lapses. Can we trust Orion won't fall into the wrong hands?" The room stilled, eyes darting to Marcus. He smiled, a predator's smile, and leaned forward. "Rumors are cheap, Victor. Evidence is what matters. My team's record is spotless. Can your partner say the same?" Victor's composure cracked. A fleeting twitch, but Marcus saw it. The seed was planted. He didn't need to accuse, not yet. The game was patience, letting Victor reveal himself. Back in New York, Elena's warnings proved true. A leak surfaced, not from Kane-Tech, but from Geneva. Encrypted files tracing back to Victor's accounts. He'd been feeding intel to a rival bidder, a Chinese consortium eager to undercut Orion. The betrayal was personal now, a challenge to Marcus's empire and his pride. He didn't confront Victor directly. Instead, he used the summit's final day to tighten the noose, dropping hints about audits, about new intel Kane-Tech had uncovered. Victor's questions grew frantic, his allies distancing themselves as Marcus's evidence, carefully shared with Claire and Hans, spread like wildfire. The consequences rippled outward. At Teterboro, Jackson and Tim faced suspensions, their careers teetering on the edge of ruin. Hargrove issued a formal apology, but the damage was done, not to Marcus, but to their own credibility. In Geneva, Victor's misstep cost him more than the deal. It cost him his reputation, his allies turning away as Marcus's evidence surfaced. Yet, Marcus didn't revel in their downfall. He felt the weight of it, the cost of a world where betrayal was currency, where passion could build empires or burn them down. As the jet carried him back to New York, Marcus leaned back, the city lights a constellation below. He thought of Teterboro, of Victor, of the countless others who'd underestimated him. Each had fueled his fire, sharpened his resolve. The passion that drove him wasn't just for wealth or power. It was for proving, again and again, that he was more than they could see. Orion would launch, its eyes scanning the world, a testament to his vision. But beyond the satellites, beyond the billions, was something deeper, a rhythm no one could take away, a pulse of defiance that beat in his chest, steady and unyielding. He closed his eyes, the jets hum a lullaby, and let the fire burn on.